Hello, my name is Malvika Rajkumar. I am the content lead of Nyaya. Today I will be talking to you about the law on domestic violence, mainly because there's been a rise in the number of domestic violence cases during the COVID-19 lockdown. The law on domestic violence is known as the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence 2005. And let's start with what is domestic violence. So, domestic violence is abusive or violent behavior that causes harm to the health and affects the health and safety of a woman or a child. And what usually happens in cases of domestic violence is that most of the times the perpetrators are someone from within the family. So, using the law, you can either prevent imminent violence or you can get remedies through court. Either you can get money or you can file a criminal complaint against your harasser, the person causing you violence. Now, actually one more point, even a single act of domestic violence can be a case for domestic violence. You will have to talk to your lawyer and move ahead with the steps for that. There are different kinds of domestic violence. Mainly, the law recognizes 4 kinds of domestic violence. Mostly, the kinds of domestic violences are on a case-to-case basis, but I'll give you some examples of these 4 kinds. The first kind is physical violence. In physical violence, if you see, and this is the most common kind of violence. Many people have the misconception that domestic violence is only physical violence. That is not true. Physical violence is one of the kinds of violences that are there in domestic violence. So if you're being hurt physically and your health, physical development or well-being is being threatened, that is, if you're being beaten, slapped, you're being hit, these are all instances, then you are being hurt physically and it's causing a danger to your life, then this is physical abuse. Then if someone makes any gestures at you, making you believe that you may be put at physical harm or your child may be put at physical harm, this is also physical violence, which is domestic violence. Then if there are any verbal threats to you or your loved ones, saying that any physical harm will be caused to you or to them, then this can also be an act of physical violence. Another kind of domestic violence is in the form of verbal and emotional abuse. In verbal and emotional abuse, you are mostly, most of the kinds of violence here are very damaging for a person. And like for example, you may be insulted, humiliated, ridiculed. For example, if your husband keeps calling you abusive names again and again. Secondly, if whoever it is, if the harasser threatens to commit suicide and causes you mental anguish, that is also kind of verbal violence. Then separating you from your child is a kind of emotional violence. Preventing you from taking a job or forcing you to leave your job. Preventing you from accessing any money or your resources, your jewelry, etc. All these can be emotional violence. Threats to cause any physical pain to your loved ones, which can be physical as well as emotional violence. Now, economic or monetary abuse is the other kind of violence. So, if you're deprived of any financial assets that you are entitled to and resources, then it is a kind of economic violence or monetary abuse. For example, if your husband keeps your money and your passport locked in a cupboard and refuses to give this to you, this is a economic / monetary abuse. Then restricting access to your resources, disposing your assets, property, etc. Not allowing you to use general household items, not giving you enough money to maintain yourself in terms of clothes, etc. Forcing you to leave the house, taking your salary. These are different kinds of emotional abuses that a woman may face. Now the question is, where can a woman face domestic violence? A woman can face domestic violence in any place. It does not matter where it happened. It can happen anywhere. There was a case called Bipin versus Meera in 2017 that said that domestic violence is not confined to the 4 walls of your house. So it can be your child's school, it can be marketplace, it can be any place. Domestic violence is not restricted to a woman's home. Now, there's a question here, is DV applicable for women or all genders? So, domestic violence law is applicable for women. Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005 is a law which protects women from domestic violence. Now, what happens when you go to court? So when you go to court, they look at three aspects. One, whether you are a woman under the act. Secondly, whether you have a domestic relationship with your harasser. This means that you are related to your harasser either through blood, that means it can be your mother, father, brother, sister, or it can be through marriage, sister-in-laws, mother-in-laws, can be through someone who's adopted in the family, so related by adoption. It can be in the nature of marriage, for example, a live-in relationship. It can also be a situation where you are living in the same area together. And you are, what happens is, the third aspect that the court looks at is whether you are living in a shared household. Now, when you hear the term shared household, you'll think, okay, I need to be in a particular household to get a recourse in domestic violence law. But you should have lived with the harasser at some point in time. That's all courts actually look for. And you should have shared a domestic relationship with your harasser. That is very important. Now, who all can you complain against? This is a very important question. You can complain against your family. It can be immediate, distant members, etc. You can complain against your live-in partner, and there have been questions whether you can complain against a minor. There have been cases where this has been allowed, but again, this is on case-to-case basis. You do have a recourse to complain against a minor. For example, a 16-year-old boy is harassing you at home. It is domestic violence. Now, let's look at how to file a complaint. Now, who can file a complaint? So any woman can file a complaint. It does not, your religion does not matter. Firstly, you are eligible as long as you're a woman. Secondly, if you're married, then you have a right to complain because you had a domestic relationship with the harasser. Thirdly, let's say you're divorced. Now, let's say that the domestic violence happened before the divorce. Then it is clear that all you need to establish is that you had a domestic relationship with the harasser. That means you were related to him by blood, etc. And let's say the domestic violence took place after the divorce. So all you need to prove is that the domestic violence existed, that the violence existed, and the court may hear on a case-to-case basis. Now, let's say that you've initiated divorce, but you didn't go through the divorce. It does not matter. If you can prove that you had a domestic relationship and that there's violence, you can go to court. Now, let's say that you deserted your husband. Can you still file a domestic violence case? See, you can file a domestic violence case if you've deserted your husband because of the violence you were facing. But if you deserted your husband for reasons not related to violence at home, then you will not have a claim. For example, if you leave your husband for a reason which is not related to violence, like you leave him for another man or you leave him to be alone, whatever the reason is, these cases will be frivolous. And you can see in most family law cases, usually with a divorce case, a lot of domestic violence cases also go about. It is a common factor. Then let's say you're judicially separated. Let's say that the violence happened before the judicial separation. You just need to prove that you'd faced violence. Then let's say you're a live-in. Now, a live-in relationship is, the Supreme Court has said that a live-in relationship, as long as it's in the nature of marriage, which means there are certain conditions which are similar to marriage, are recognized, and the domestic violence law also applies here. So if your live-in partner harasses you, you can file a domestic violence complaint. Now, let's say you are a widow. Now, just because there is the death of your husband does not mean that the relationship with your in-laws gets severed. So if your in-laws harass you or anyone else harasses you and you can prove you have a domestic relationship with them, you have a claim to file a case for domestic violence. Now, who all can you go to for domestic violence? Now, first of all, you can file a complaint with the police. So you can go to the nearest police station. It can be you can file it at any police station. There's a concept known as zero FIR. You don't have to file it at the place where the incident occurred. They will transfer the case to the corresponding jurisdiction. So when you go to the police station, you can ask for a protection officer. Usually these are designated officers with ranks under the law, and they are usually women. So the role of the protection officer is very important in domestic violence law, because they are the ones that protect you, provide, give you imminent protection, deal with the harasser. They will help you file this form called the Domestic Incidents Report, and this is known as a DIR. This is a version of FIR, but particularly for domestic violence law. You can see it as a schedule in the act when you open it, and then they also help you with respect to shelter. They'll provide place of residence, they'll help you get in touch with a shelter home, etc. They'll help you through the process of court, etc. Now you can also approach the National Commission for Women, which is a national body for the protection of women rights issues. You can also approach in your state the State Commission for Women to file a complaint. They will help you with counseling sessions. They will help you with online complaint. They will help you with counseling sessions. They will form an inquiry committee that will look into the matter. And let's say that you can't physically go to this place, you can file a complaint online. If you go to the National Commission for Women website, there is a complaint portal online. Now you can also approach these people known as the service providers. These are usually companies that are registered under the law, under domestic violence law and societies registration law. So what happens is their role is to actually protect women from domestic violence. Their role is to actually provide legal aid, they help you through the violence, etc. And you will get a lot of support from them. And there are a lot of domestic violence service providers in India. You can just Google them to find the names. And if you have any more questions on this subject, please do drop your doubts and queries to the Ask Nyaya tab on www.nyaya.org, and Nyaya will definitely reply to you. You can also follow Nyaya on Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, and Instagram. We are also there on TikTok with some fun videos. Please remember that anyone can file a complaint for domestic violence. So if you know that someone nearby is facing domestic violence, you can also call the police on 100 and actually complain to them. I hope the session was helpful. I am looking forward to all your queries.